Hey everyone, so I saw this post from Addy Osmani which is really thought-provoking, and this was just an image with some animation, and I thought about creating an app with React with that. So first of all, we are going to use npm create Vite at latest to use Vite to create a React project. We are going to select React and we are also going to select TypeScript. Once done, you can open this into VS Code or your favorite editor. I'm going to use VS Code for this. In VS Code, you can open terminal and then you can install the packages using npm install. And once done, you can run npm run dev to start the server on localhost. You will see that by default, we get a Vite plus React logo application, which is the default when you create a React app with Vite. But we are going to go in the app.tsx inside the source folder and we are going to delete all the templates. So remove all the HTML just like this. And you can also remove the imports up top just like this as well. Now we are going to create a container, a div with class container, and then we are going to create a UL and we are going to create list items inside. Now it's important to notice that even though we have a grid to show there, it is still good to have the UL and LI elements, which are the semantic HTML elements for list and list items. So it's really good for SEO. We're going to give this UL class grid and the LIs will have class grid item, just like this. Now inside the grid item, we need to have two things. We need to have the SVG or the circle, and we need to have the text. So we're going to create two divs for this. Now the first thing that we'll do is we are going to create an array of all the items that we need to render on the UI. So we are using the useState hook for creating a state variable containing the array of items. And we're going to define the type of the items just like this. We will have a text of type string, which contains the text to show. And then we have a Boolean variable called selected, which shows if the element has been selected or clicked right now or not. And just to make it clear, whenever an item is clicked, we will show the SVG or the check mark. And if not, then we'll show a circle. So let's quickly create the list of items just like this. I will leave the last item ego and not hard coded right here because I'm going to be using that ego in different places because there's a special use case for the ego button, as you saw in the animation, because whenever you click the ego button, the rest of the checked SVGs will be checked off or they will be unselected. So I'm going to create a constant for this. Let's create a constant called ego and the value is going to be ego just like this. And then we're going to use the constant right here. And we are obviously going to use the constant later on as well. Now, instead of hard coding this list item, we can loop over the items array, and as many items as we have in the list array or the array, we are going to return the list items. So we'll have as many list items as the items in the array, just like this. Now we're going to add the key as item.text because React wants us to have a key attribute on each item inside a map. For example, we are rendering a lot of list items. Each item has to have a unique key, and we know that each text is completely different, so we can use it as it is. Now we're going to also render the text just like this. And if you go to our browser, you can see that we have a list of all the items that we have just created. Now the next thing that we need to do is to go to our CSS file, and we are going to delete all the styles apart from the root one. Now we're going to style the grid. We're going to give this display grid, and we are going to also say that this is going to be a 3 columns grid. So we say repeat 3, and then we set min max to 0 and 1 fraction or 1 FR, which means we are going to have a 3 columns grid in this case. I'm not going to go into too much details about grid at the moment. Now we can give this a gap because you can see that right now we have not too much gap, and you can even see the text being overlapping each other. So we can give the gap of 16 pixel just like this, and you can see now we have some sort of gap between those. We can also add the justify content space between, but we are going to go and style the grid item now. The grid item is going to be display flex, and the flex direction is going to be column. The reason we are giving the grid item a flex is we just want the circle and the text to be in a vertical column or in vertical position. And now we can also style the circle. In the beginning, I'm just going to give the circle the width and height and also the border so we can see at least something. Here you see a box for each circle, which sounds weird, but you can at least see the item being rendered there. Now you'll notice that the space between the text and the circle, or the square in this case, is not too much. So we need to give some space between. So let's give a gap of 8 pixel, and now you'll see there's a bit better gap between those. Now I'm also give this a cursor pointer so the user, when they mouse over these circles, they know that there is an actionable item. Now I'm going to go to our circle and give the border radius to 50%, which basically converts this whole square into a circle. Pretty neat hack right there. And then I'm also going to set some margins. So from left and right, we are setting auto, and the top and bottom margin, we are setting 6.5. So we have some more spacing as we want to show in the UI. Now we can also add some margin between the grid items. So the left and right of these items, we are going to give 32 pixels. So we have even more gap between those, just like this. And this now looks pretty close to the animation that we saw on Addy Osmani's post. Now we also gave this margin bottom, so we have some space between these two rows as well. Now we're going to add the checkmark SVG in our app. So we are going to go to heroicons.com and we'll go to solid and we are going to pick the check circle and we are directly going to copy the JSX. Since we are using React, we don't need to copy the SVG because it will result in some weird attributes that we don't want. We can copy the JSX and then we can go inside here and just above the circle, we are also going to paste the SVG. Now, if we go to our application, you will see that now we see the check mark as well as the circle. So everything is just there right now. Now to color the SVG, we are going to change the class attributes or the class name attribute just like this. By default, we are going to assign a check green class to all of them. And now we can go to our app.css and give the check green class a color of light green. When we save this and go to our application, you can see that now we have the green check marks. This is super cool. Now, what if I also want to have the red check mark, especially for the ego button? In this case, we also need to create a new class called check red. And then inside here, we can give the color tomato. I actually love this one. Now we can go here and try out the red. And if you go to the app, you can actually see the red color being applied to everyone. Now let's modify this a bit to only apply this to the element that has the text ego. And we can do it just like this. Now, if I go to my application, you can see that we have the red color only on ego and everyone else is just green. This is actually getting pretty close to what we want. Now, as you already know, we need to either show the SVG or the circle, not both at the same time. So we are going to conditionally render these now. So we can basically cut this and put that inside a if block, which checks if we have the item.selected, then we show the SVG. Otherwise, we show the circle just like this. Now, if you go to the application, you'll see that we only show the circle at the moment because none of the items are selected at the moment. So let's try and see what happens if all the items are selected. So I'm just going to flip this particular switch and you can see that now we see what happens if every item is selected. Now I'm going to revert this back. Now, when we mouse over, you can see that we have the cursor pointer there, but there's no visual feedback on if the item is being actually hovered. We can do better. So we are going to go to our app CSS and we're going to say whenever a grid item is hovered, we are going to set the opacity to 0.75. Now you see that the visual response is much more better. Now let's go ahead and implement the toggle functionality. So we are going to say const and we are going to say toggle item, and this will receive one single item and then it will set the whole items array. Now the approach I'm using right now here is one which includes not mutating the actual array. So what I want to tell you here is that it is considered a bad practice in the JavaScript community to directly update a particular object's property or to directly update an array. This is called mutation, and we usually try to avoid that. Instead, we want to go to the immutable approach, in which we are now saying that the items array that we have in our React app, we are going to completely replace that with a new array. So what we are doing here is we are going to go and say items.map, which returns a whole new array. And even inside that, we are returning the item which already exists. But if there's a change in the item, then we are using this spread operator to take all of the values from the item that we had, but just flipping the selected attribute just like this. And that's pretty much it. The code might look a bit too much, but it actually does the job. And when you try it a few times and then you tweak it, you'll understand much more. Now that we have the function ready, let's add that to the list item. So we're going to go ahead and say on click, and we're just going to create a function here. And inside the function, we directly call the toggle item with the item being passed. Now, if you look closely, the item attribute right here is actually the item that we are getting from the map. So we are looping over the items array. We get each item. We render a list item for this item variable. And then we also, when we click this particular item or list item, we are passing the item variable, the same item variable as well. So everything is related to what is the current item that we are talking about, whether it's about rendering the list item or clicking and passing that list item into our function. Now that we have the function applied, let's try this out. If I go to my application, you can see that whenever I click a particular item, it changes and toggles it. So we see the SVG. And if I click this again, it goes back. One thing that you'll notice is that we have this jumping UI. So whenever we switch, you can see that the whole text actually jumps, and this is not a great user experience, and it's actually bad when it comes to search engine optimization if you're doing it on page load. So what do we want to do right here? We're gonna go and adjust our CSS. And the only reason why we are having this issue is a bit tricky because all the dimensions that we have right now written in the CSS, because I already calculated it, it's actually perfect. But we miss one single thing, and that is box sizing. So we need to add this particular style at the top, which says all the items in my HTML is going to use box sizing border box. And now if I switch this, you're going to see that there's no jump at all because both the SVG and the circle, they are all of the same size, and obviously that makes the whole item the same size even if you're toggling between them. Now we are going to implement the logic of the ego button, because whenever the ego button is selected, none of the other items should be selected. But for now, what we are going to do is to create a variable, a state variable that holds this information if the ego button is currently selected or not. So we're going to create a const called ego selected with set ego selected as the updater function using the useState hook. And we are going to initialize this with false, obviously, because ego is not selected in the beginning. Now what we can do is whenever we toggle a particular item, we're going to check if the item that we are toggling right now is ego. And if it's ego, then we are going to just flip the switch. So here we are going to revert whatever the value of selected is. So if previously the item that we are selecting right now was not selected, then we flip the ego selected right here. And we also flip it down on line number 52 as well. So we do the same thing for two different things. One, for rendering the UI. Second, for this particular variable that we are going to use later on. So this basically sets the variable true or false based on if I'm toggling the ego button. Now let's talk about the functionality of the ego selected. Whenever the ego selected is turned on, if we had other selected checkboxes, they should be unchecked. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to say if the ego selected is there, and I'm also going to make the dependency of ego selected for this useEffect. Then if the ego is selected, then I'm going to call the set items, and I will set the selected value of every item false apart from the one that is ego. So I'm just going to check that if the element.text is not ego, then we just return a new object with the selected set to false. This basically unselects all the checkboxes apart from the ego one. Now, if I go to my browser, you can see that if I check a couple of objects here and click ego, all of them are unselected, but the ego remains selected. This is also important. And you'll also see that if I'm selecting this or unchecking it, nothing happens. But when I check it, when I make the ego set to true, only then it reverts everything. But if I set it to false, then nothing happens. So we are also going to do something about that. Ideally, what should happen is that if the ego is already checked, I should not be even able to check the other boxes. That's what basically the animation told us about. So that's what we are going to implement now. So we're going to go to our toggle item function, and we are going to check if the ego selected is already true. And now we are trying to click an element that is not ego. So we need to revert this condition to not ego. Then we are going to just return. We are not going to do anything at all. We just need to return from here. And now if I try the same thing, you can see that it works. So if I try to check some items, click ego, you can see that all of the items are unselected. And then if I try to click other items, none of them actually work because the ego is selected. So I need to uncheck it before I can select the other ones. And this is the functionality that we needed. Now there's one tiny problem with this, and that is for the user, it doesn't really make sense what's happening, because as soon as the user clicks ego, none of the buttons work, but there's no visual feedback again for the user. And this is again really bad user experience. So we need to somehow inform the user that you can't select the other ones because you have selected ego. And that was also shown in the animation to some extent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this really cool library called Animista, and I'm going to go to the attention section, and inside here we have shake, and we're going to select the shake left and right. And if I click this button, I can copy both the class and also the keyframe. So I'm going to go to my app CSS, and at the very bottom I'm going to paste both the class and the keyframes as well. Now what we need to do is to apply this class to the UI, and we need to only do that when we already have the ego selected and we're trying to click other items. That's when the elements should shake and say, no, you can't really do that. So in order to do so, I'm going to create a new variable, a state variable called shake elements. And I'm also going to use the useState for this one. And then I'm going to say false by default because we are not applying this in the beginning. Now in my toggle item function, whenever the ego is selected and I'm trying to click an item which is not ego, that means I'm trying to do something that is not allowed. That is exactly when I'm going to say the set shake elements set to true. And then after a while, I'm just going to remove the class so we can do that again. So here I'm going to quickly go here and say set shake elements set to false. Now this is not the best way to do this, or you can optimize this. You can clear the timeout if the user is trying to, simultaneously click multiple times. You can make this better, but I'm just going to keep this simple for you and then you can optimize it later on. Now I'm going to go on my list item and I'm going to just apply the class inside the list item. So I'm going to just change this. And then I can say if the shake elements is set to true, then I want to apply the shake LR class. Otherwise, I'm not going to apply any class. And now if I go to my application, select a bunch of items, select ego and click something that should not be selected, you can see all of the items start shaking. And this is quite similar to what the animation told us to do. I'm really happy on how cool this looks. And to be honest, the application is done here. But if you want to stick around, you can see how I deploy this application to GitHub Pages. So I can show this off to the entire world and post this on social media as well. So if you go to the documentation of Vite, you can see this section of deploying a static site. And you can go to the GitHub Pages section to see the instructions. The main thing right here is to make sure that you have the base href set to the repository name in your GitHub account. So I'm going to go to my VS Code and go to Vite config ts, and here I'm just going to add the base href. And I know that my repository name is going to be ego issue react. So make sure to have the slashes at the beginning and the end because that's what's required, and that's also in the Vite documentation. Now I'm going to go to my GitHub and I'm going to create a new repository. I'm going to name it exactly what I put in the Vite config. So ego issue react. I'm going to select myself as the owner because I don't want to put this into an organization, and I'll just create the repository. Now it's important to copy this line which says git remote add origin. So you can copy that. Now I'm going to open my terminal and I'm going to do git status, and you can see that this is not a git repository. So I'm going to do git init. I can quickly stage all the items and then commit with the initial commit. And now I can add the remote that I copied from GitHub. Now all that is remaining is just to push to GitHub. So I can do git push u origin main. And if I go to GitHub and refresh, there we go. We have the code pushed just now. Now what you need to do is to go to settings and go to pages. And inside here, select the source from GitHub Actions. Now that you have this, click the button that says create your own. But before that, you need to go to Vite and copy this default sort of YAML file, and you can copy the code from here. We're going to need it in just a minute. Once you've copied it, click create your own. And then when you're editing this file, just replace the content with what you have copied. Now you should put the name of your file. So I'm just going to use deploy.yaml. And now you can see that the code looks pretty nice because it can basically detect what is the file format. Now let's go through the code quickly. First of all, this is going to be the name of the action. Then we are only running this when we push to main. Then we are also providing some permissions to GitHub to be able to deploy to GitHub Pages, which basically pushes this to the Artifactory. And then we are also going to look at the steps. So we clone the code using checkout. We set up the Node.js environment, which is right now using Node version 20. Then we install the dependencies. We build our application. Then we set up the GitHub Pages using the actions. Then we upload the artifacts, and then we deploy the dist directory. So when we run npm run build, it creates the build in the dist folder, and that is what's deployed to GitHub Pages. So I'm quickly going to commit this into the repository. And now if I go to actions, you can see automatically our first GitHub action is running. I'm going to let it run and wait for it to be deployed. There we go. Now this is deployed. So we can go to our code tab, and on the right side, you see this settings or gear icon. You click that. And here you can say for the website, I want to use the GitHub Pages website. So when you click this, it will automatically populate the link for you, and you can click Save Changes. And here you can see the link now. So you can just click this, and there we go. We can see our application deployed right here. But the reality is that this doesn't look great. If I want to show this off to someone and they come here and there's no heading, there's no information on what the app does, it's not really nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a heading here as well. So we'll go to our code in the app tsx and add a heading right here. We're going to put this text right here, and then we'll also center it because it looks super weird. So I'm going to give this class called main-heading, and in the app CSS, I can go and say that the container that we have has a main heading, and has text align set to center. And you can see that we have the text center right now. Now, one thing that looks really weird is that the UI is still jumping, so something is wrong. So we're going to debug this in the browser, and I took some time to debug this and see the differences between the width and height. So I'm not going to bother you with all the details on how I figured this out, but I'm going to show you how to fix that. We're going to add some styles for the SVG, and here we are going to copy the styles from circle, just like this. Now, if I click this, you can see that this is much better, and now you can see that they don't really move much. However, there is a difference between the circle and the SVG. The SVG is smaller, the circle is not as small, or there's a difference. And in the animation, they both had the same size. So I want to do the same. And to fix this, we are going to add transform scale 1.2. And if we check this out now, you can see that this works flawlessly. And now that this works, I'm quickly going to commit this. And one thing that I want to do is also to make it good for SEO. So if I try to look at metatext.io and look at how it looks when it comes to sharing this on social media, you will see that there's no image that you can see right there. So what I've done is I've taken a screenshot and I want to see how this looks when we share this. So we need to set the title correctly. We also need to set the description correctly. And then we can click this button called get code. And then we can copy this code and then go to our HTML and we can just paste it right there. Now, one thing that we need to change is this meta property, which is Twitter image. And we need to change this, placeholder link of metatext.io to actually our image that I've just put in the public folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this link by changing both of these occurrences to meta.jpg. Now I've put this meta.jpg in the public folder, but this only exists in my local right now. And a better way to do this is to actually use the URL that is remote. So I'm going to do that in just a bit. And now that I've pushed the code, I can see that the URL is this one, and I can see that on production on GitHub Pages. So I'm going to copy this link actually. And then I can go here and then replace this correctly on both of the places. And I'm going to just commit and push again. And now we're just going to wait for the deployment to finish. And now if I go to my browser, you can see that the app still works. And if I go to metatext.io and parse it, yay, you can see that now we have the image right there. Super cool. And we're going to just do a quick test run. So I'm going to go to my LinkedIn. And if I just paste this link, you can see that the image automatically comes in, and we also have the title there as well. So everything looks nice here. Now, one thing that I noticed later on my mobile phone is that this app is not mobile responsive. And that's probably the first thing I should have checked as a web developer, and everyone should check. So when I checked it, I saw that the UL has this weird little padding on the left that doesn't look great. And the second issue is that we are showing 6 items or 3 items in a row, even on a mobile phone, which doesn't sound really good. So we actually should have 2 items when this is a mobile phone. And then if we have more space, then we can show 3 items per row. So first of all, we are going to go to the grid and set the padding to 0, which will basically ensure that we don't have any padding in whatsoever, because this padding should not even be on a large screen as well. So I'm just going to remove the padding and set it to 0. Now we can look into the column thingy. So I can say media all and width is less than 500 pixel. In that case, I'm going to say the grid has grid template columns. Instead of repeat 3, I'm going to say repeat 2, and the rest of it remains exactly the same. And now if I go to my app, you can see on a mobile screen, we have 2 columns in this case, or 2 items per row. And then if I go to a larger screen, we show 3 items or 3 columns in this case, which is exactly what we wanted. So I'm just going to add this and commit this again and push it. And let's look at the application. So this is before our changes that we just did. So this looked weird on a mobile phone. And now the deployment has finished. If we refresh the app, you can see that this works pretty nicely on mobile as well. And that's pretty much it. I hope you liked this video. If you did, press the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And if you have more cool ideas like this that you want me to build with React or Angular, let me know in the comments. And as always, happy coding. I'm going to see you in the next video.